So, are you familiar with the term trust fund babies? I'm sure you are because a lot of people are, familiar with it and we tend to use it, right? But even though we're familiar with this term, one thing that I've noted as someone who's working in the sector, right, is that not a lot of people actually understand what trusts are, their usefulness, and why we actually have to use these trusts. We just use this term, when we see someone is balling and is having a lot of fun, or when we know that, okay, this one got a lot of inheritance. But let's talk about this today. Let's talk about what a trust is and the usefulness of a trust so that you can determine whether or not, okay, this is something I need to be looking into, right? So without further ado or wasting any time, let's get into the discussion. But before we do so, for all of those that are new here, good afternoon. My name is Yolanda Mnyengeza and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyengeza Attorneys. So let's dive into it. So what is a trust in essence? Now, a trust is an entity which you establish yourself, right, as the founder. What happens is that you move the things you have in your personal capacity, be it property, be it your shares, be it your investments, whatever you choose, and then you place it into this entity we call the trust. So the notion is that you're moving it away from your own personal capacity, but rather now you're placing it in to this entity so that you may continue to benefit from it, but not own it, right? And we'll talk about why people prefer not to own, things in their personal capacity. And once these things are moved into this entity we call a trust, then people who are named beneficiaries will benefit. So who are the three most important parties when you're establishing a trust? The first one is you, who's the founder, the person that's establishing this whole thing. Then we've got the second type of people who are important here. We call them the trustees. If you look at it in the context of a company, these people would be directors, right? So these trustees are responsible for managing this trust and ensuring that things happen according to the instructions and according to the law, right? Then we have the most important people here who are the beneficiaries, right? It can either be you and your family or whoever it is that you name as a beneficiary. So these people are going to be benefiting from the things that you have placed in that entity. So why in essence would people be moving these things out of their own personal capacity to the trust? First reason, and the usefulness of a trust, is the fact that people want the things that they've worked for to benefit not only their next generation, but other generations coming after the next generation. So they want their assets to be generational. What does this mean in essence? So remember, when you own something in your personal capacity, possibility is that the next generation will also inherit it in their own personal capacity. Which means what? Which means that it's easy for them to sell it should you pass away because it's theirs, it's in their personal name. Secondly, it's easy for them to lose it. Let's say they are in a situation such as a divorce. Then they are now having to split things with their spouses, right? The third way in which they could lose this property is by way of creditors, collecting in a case where they are failing to pay for whatever debts that they have. Then in that instance, whatever you've worked for, that property that they inherited would be gone in the next generation. Whereas if you just place it in a trust and then they benefit either by living on these properties or by benefiting by these properties making money for them, they can never do away with those properties because they don't own them, which means that the potential of these properties getting to the next generation and the next is very high, right? So that's the first reason and the usefulness of actually having a trust. Now, this also saves a lot of families administration costs because once you move everything that you have in your personal capacity to the trust, it will mean that when you pass away, you'll probably pass away with assets less than 250,000 Rand, which means your family will not have to go through the administration process. Ask anybody who's gone through the administration process, and they will tell you how tedious and long it is. And unfortunately, it's the nature of the process. So people who often are safe are those that actually have trust, right? And in the case of administration, one thing that happens is that before administration is complete, people can't get what is due to them, right? They can't get their inheritance. Some people have gone to 2 years, 3 years, still without getting what is due to them. Because of what? Because of the administration process. So this also saves you if you establish this trust now, so that your family always readily can get access to the money that they're going to need, or to whatever benefit this trust is going to provide to them, unlike having to wait for years for the administration to complete. Right? Now, the second reason why some people would often also set up a trust is so that they can preserve their assets, protect their assets also when they're still alive, not only for the benefit of people when they die, but when they are also still alive. For example, in the case of business owners, business owners, one of the things that they love to do is taking risks. And those risks include taking out debt. Now, when they take out debt, one of the things that they do often is that they hold themselves as surety to those debts, which means that if the company cannot pay for those debts, then the creditors can come and collect, from them in their personal capacity. And for a lot of business owners, they've lost everything through this process. But if you're a very intelligent business owner here, what you're going to do is that you're going to set up this entity, have all of the assets that are valuable and everything that you believe is valuable, and place it in a trust. And then you can act however it is that you'd like to act pertaining to that business, knowing very well that if that business fails and you are unable to pay, those creditors can't come and collect in your trust. Right? But in order for you to successfully do this, you need to ensure that this trust of yours is run on par, right? So which means that you need to get people who are professionals to assist you with this, particularly if you're not familiar with how a trust should be run. Also, the other reason why people would opt for a trust is so that they don't lose assets in the future. Let's say they get married, right? They're not only concerned about their own kids, they're also concerned about themselves, because in the future they would like to get married. So they don't want a situation where now marriage has to come to an end and now they have to lose the things that they have worked for all their entire existence. Right? So it's useful in that sense, because if it's not in your personal capacity, we should not be talking about it in a divorce matter, right? Unless, of course, there's something wrong that you did or you acted unlawfully. But in essence, we should not even be discussing the things in a trust, because you don't own them. They are in the entity. You just benefit from those things. The reason why a lot of people love to use trust, or why trusts are useful, they are useful for structuring whatever amount of money you're leaving behind for your kids, particularly kids who are minors and children who are not really mature, right? Let's explain this. So I'm sure most of us here actually have what we call life policies. We also have investments. Now, if you understand life policies or a life policy, you'll understand that this life policy you often take out to ensure that if something were to happen to you, your children still have something that they can rely on that will sustain them. If you're paying fees for your kids, you're feeding them, you're doing this and that, you want this to continue to happen even when you're not there, right? Because you know for a fact it's not going to be easy to get someone who can just do this and take over those responsibilities. Hence, you then take out what we call a life policy. But now the mistake a lot of the parents tend to make is that they often name the minor children as well as the immature children who are between the ages of 18 and 25 or 22 as the beneficiaries of those life policies. And unfortunately, for instance, the case of kids who are between the ages of 18 and 22, the amount of money which you place there as a life policy is going to be paid out to those kids. And normally, we've seen the repercussions of this. Those kids get these lump sums in millions. The next thing you know, within a very short space of time, amount of money is gone. Also, in the context of minors, you know, one of the things that would happen is that because this child is a minor, now this amount of money has to be paid to someone we call the guardian. Now, we all know a guardian can be whoever is going to, look after this child. And you'd find that the guardian, unfortunately, spends the money so recklessly to the extent that when the child is a bit older or when they get to a certain age, there isn't even any money to take care of them, right? But if you had established a trust and, diverted this money to the trust, you could have put in conditions there as to how, the guardian or your kids can get access to this amount of money. For example, you could simply say, no, this amount of money must be paid to the trust that I've established. And then from that trust, the child is just going to get 10,000 Rand a month, 15,000 Rand a month, depending on what you think is best. And the trust can also be responsible for paying their school fees, for paying any other thing that you think is important. And then maybe when they get to a certain age, then they can get that amount of money. And then, at least it played that role that you wanted it to play. Unlike you allowing millions be paid to a child who is yet, to be mature, a child who has not even been able in their entire existence to handle 20,000 Rand, right? So a trust is useful in that sense. And because of this is why you'll find that there are adult children, who are named trust fund babies. It means that their parents ensured that, they set up a trust and their monies were placed in that trust and they got the amount of money periodically. Now they are set for life. They don't have a need in their entire existence. So this is something that you should think about as someone who is a parent, particularly to minor kids, someone who's a parent to children that are yet to be mature between the ages of 18 and 22 to 25, because at that age, it's very difficult for these children to handle this amount of money. Believe you me, the things that we see. All right, let's move on to the last, thing or the reason why a lot of people love to establish. And now the last reason we're going to talk about why people often make use of trusts and the usefulness of a trust is that it protects your estate from having to pay estate duty tax. Now remember, if you pass away, your estate still has to be assessed and it has to be determined how much tax it still is liable for, even in your death. Right? And one of the most expensive taxes that is often applicable in an estate or deceased estate is a tax which we call an estate duty tax, right? And this tax is normally applicable if the value of your properties or your estate is more than 3.5 million Rand. For example, if you have in combination assets that are valued at more than 3.5 million, you can rest assured that your estate will probably have to pay estate duty tax, which is the most expensive type of tax. Now, if you establish a trust when you're still alive and move all of your assets into the trust, you are not, or your estate is not going to be liable to pay this amount, because by the time you pass away, you probably have nothing in your name, or whatever it is that you have is literally bare minimum. It doesn't get to 3.5 million Rand. So which means that you escape paying for this estate duty tax. So that's also one of the most useful things about having a trust. So this brings us to the end of our discussion today, and we actually hope that it has been useful to you, in a sense that it has taught you some of the most important reasons, why people establish trust, the usefulness of a trust. And like we always say, once you're ready to set up a trust, speak to your legal practitioner who specializes in trusts, or you're welcome to also contact us so that you understand also some of the responsibilities you will have and the responsibilities of the trustees before you set up this entity. And just to mention, we're also hosting a webinar on the 9th of December, of this year, so that we can provide people, with some insight as to how a trust really operates, the responsibilities of the different parties, and also the tax implications, right? Because a lot of people still don't understand how these work. So it's always beneficial for you to understand just a bit of how everything works before you set up that trust. So in case you want to join us, you're welcome to send us an email and we will send you all of those details so that we can sign you up, right? So that brings us to the end of our discussion today. Like we always say, if this was helpful to you and you think it could benefit another person, share, like, subscribe, come back. Also encourage them to subscribe so that they can get access to such content. So we hope that this has been useful. Again, my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza, and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyengeza Attorneys. We'll see you next time.